This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
So will China and the U.S. be dragged into a trade war? And where are we headed? Let's talk to two experts working at think tanks who know China well. Michael Pillsbury is a senior fellow and director of Chinese strategy at the Hudson Institute. He has worked in U.S. Congress and the executive branch for every administration since President Richard Nixon. And also Mr. Wang Huiyao, founder of the Center for China and Globalization and the largest independent global think tank here in China. I want to talk a little bit about the second point, which is the transfer of technology. Mm-hmm. It is in relation to Made in China 2025. What kind of concessions can China make? Can China stop Made in China 2025? China doesn't accept that we steal technology on a massive scale from America.
Not the program.
What is China's argument?
Well, I think that China actually accustomed to a plan. There's always a plan. There's a full modernization plan. There's a 5 years plan. I mean, 2020. There's a 10 years talent plan. There's a 25 manufacturing plan. So I think this probably is a characteristic of China that they're accustomed to working this kind of plan. I think this plan is a little bit over-exaggerated because China is still at a ministry level. I think State Council has transmitted that document, but it was not really a hard printed plan already. So I think there was still discussions and things. I think China, actually, it's really important for China to have a plan. I mean, China wants to develop, China wants to but I think we seem to have a misunderstanding problem with that, and then we probably could have more dialogue, should have more discussion, should have more communication.
I think what Americans have problem is not the Chinese have plans, but the national government's role in those plans. They say the state is basically subsidizing all the industries they cherry-picked. What is the problem with that?
Well, for that, I think China is, of course, I think the world has got to realize China, of course, it was for the last 70, even last 40 years. Government does play a very important role, and that's why you can see the efficiency, the effectiveness. Building outside this window, you can build in a year and a half, which is probably world speed. That's government probably put a lot of effort on that. So that probably is a model that China does.
Mr. Pillsbury,
yes,
we have our system, you have your system. Our system works this way. What's wrong?
Well, what's wrong is the Chinese government promised when you joined the WTO that you would move toward a free market country. Mm-hmm. At that time,
but free market doesn't necessarily mean government has no role at all.
No, that's right. All governments play a role in all economies. The question is the degree. And so many countries, as you know, last fall, they voted against China being given free market status. Mm. This is a correct decision. The role of state-owned enterprises, the role of these national plans, are in violation of China's agreement to join the WTO back in 2001. At that time, China could have said, we will keep our state-controlled system forever. We are never going to have a free market.
I think nobody.
But China promised, China promised to go toward a free market.
You don't think China has kept the promise?
No,
China
not just me. The vote in the WTO was overwhelming against China.
China is reforming its state-owned enterprises, but on its own agenda with its own pace. Mm-hmm. Is that the problem with the speed of the reform or about the direction?
I think it's neither speed or direction. I think it's the illegal conduct. When you join the WTO, your companies have to be free market companies that make their own decisions according to profit for the company. They're not supposed to be agents of the central government trying to obtain minerals or oil or do things for the central government. Our companies don't do this. But that's what China's been doing. That's what's in these reports.
Yes, I know.
So if you want to pull out of the WTO, then you're free to do this.
But you have to show proof which enterprise
True.
decided on which
True.
directive from the state government
True.
to make which kind of decision.
That's what's in
And
these
you don't-
reports.
And you don't have
That's what's in these reports. And in the past 2
foolproof
weeks,
evidence of that.
there is evidence. I don't know if it's perfect evidence, but even in the past week, another round of hearings has begun in Washington with 80 more witnesses coming to talk about these violations. So all I'm saying is Chinese side should not ignore the evidence. In our joint research, I think we're going to take a look at the quality of evidence in these White House reports and in the new one, and then try to make some recommendations. Could China, in fact, make progress in China's own national interest to stop this kind of bad conduct?
I think it is in China's own interest to reform those state-owned enterprises and maybe correct some of their behaviors, which is not in the interest of their companies and not in the interest of this nation.
I think
But
China has.
what
already-
needs to happen, Mr. Wang?
No, I think China has realized that. I mean, President Xi has actually, emphasized that China is continue to open and the reform is continue, and Premier Li has actually had meetings, and the Vice Premier Liu He has recently had the state state asset administration meetings as well. So I think those are China's the progress. I mean, also the third plan of 18th Party's Congress, actually the 16 reform measures. China has realized that. So I think it's really now it's important to analyze, to show the evidence how reform. Of course, if we have still not enough, if that has been pointed out, we can check that. We can see if that has happened. But I think it's the key is to respond, to communicate, and to do research, and then also to
I agree.
to really address that issue.
And that finally comes down to whether we have faith in each other's intentions.
Yes, that's true.
Strategic trust, whether we believe it is a partner, not opponent, let us say enemy. Do you think we can have that faith in each other?
I do. So far, we have never said enemy. We don't say adversary. President Trump's national security strategy used the word competitor. It didn't say enemy.
Rivalry.
So, in references to rivalry. But even Liu Mingfu in his Bainian Malasong, he says to me one time, it's not Malasong is not share, not killing people. It's running. So I'm still optimistic about the two countries being able to cooperate and not get into a war. But I don't want to be complacent. Some Chinese officials have told me they are not going to read this evidence. They think it's completely false, and they deny everything without even reading what the White House has released.
I believe many people in the Commerce Ministry are reading the report.
Really?
Yes.
That's very good news for me.
And another thing many analysts here in China worry about is that actually President Trump is connecting many things. He's playing a big game against China. He's connecting trade issues with North Korea issue, with Taiwan, or even the South China Sea. He's juggling all these things as leverages. Is that what Trump is doing?
He says he has a visionary approach to the future.
And that is his vision.
So I think if he is only looking at each issue in isolation by itself, this would not be the brilliant genius Trump that I know.
And Mr. Wang?
No, I think that's you're right. It was all connected. But I think President Trump has made progress on North Korea because of China's support. I think so that actually showed that China and the U.S. can work together on some issues. So I think now President Trump is a businessman and he knows business. So we hope that now, given China and the U.S. are two biggest economy in the world, that China and the U.S. should find a way to work out on those issues. And now I'm also even more noticing now that President Trump is even a free trader. I mean, he's getting this agreement with the EU of zero tariff. Yes. So which means he's turning around and now he's having something on TTIP even bigger. So So then, if he comes back for free trade, then China and U.S. can talk about. We can talk about free trade. We can talk about BIT.
But what worries many people, at least here in China, is that if President Trump doesn't get what he wants on trade, he will use the Taiwan card, the South China Sea card, to force China to make concessions on those issues.
Well, I think that China has many other cards too. I mean, so that's not.
But do you think he will play that card?
No, I think still the economy is the bedrock. I mean, is really the cornerstone of Sino-U.S. relations. It's so important, and then let's solve that, and let's maybe dialogue and communicate and negotiate on that. And China's China's own interest opening up further. China never said they're going to close the door. China's going to close. It's like America seems closing the door, but now I can see he's open door to Europe. Now, so if he can open door to Europe, why can't open door to China? And we can have a dialogue. We can solve this problems peacefully, and so that the other cards we don't have to play. I mean, if he's playing, so that's, I think, economy is still the most important glue of those two countries.
Let's hope so. But also look at the scenarios that
President
may
Trump,
be unfolding.
to your point, President Trump already tweeted that if President Xi helps him on North Korea, he will have an easier approach on trade. So President Trump himself acknowledges linking different issues together.
Different issues. But let's look at the likelihood of where this trade dispute will go. Do you think Trump will place 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports? Because there's no talks right now about what kind of terms, what kind of
Yes, I think it's
have.
possible. I think it's possible. It's one reason I volunteered to join Henry to try to do this joint research by the think tanks, an additional think tanks on Chinese side, some other American think tanks, to try to understand the origins of the trade issues and then some solutions. But to measure the consequences quantitatively is also needed. It's not clear to me, at least, the effect of 100% tariffs on both sides, 10%. Some people play this down. They say it won't have too much effect. Others say, no, it's already influencing decisions. For example, Chinese investors have already canceled a lot of deals
and Americans
into the U.S.
don't know whether to double down on their investment,
yes,
recruit more people,
that's right,
or should be on hold.
That's right. So
uncertainty
exactly,
is businessmen hate.
Exactly. Uncertainty is the enemy of economic growth. So that's why, I'm sorry to repeat it, but that's why a Chinese side taking a look at the specific American evidence of wrongdoing and then thinking constructively, could we stop this? Is it in our own national interest to stop this bad practice? If that happens, then there's no fear of a trade war.
And is it possible to really have correct quantitative analysis of the impact? Or probably the consequences will be unimaginably bad for both sides that we can't cope with at last?
I don't know if you know the American joke about economists and quantitative predictions. We often say economists say on the one hand, on the other hand, sometimes they even have a third hand. So economists debate the quantitative measurement of economic activities. It's a kind of a gray area. I personally hope we don't go into this gray area.
Are China doing the same math that the Americans? What will be the consequences?
I think it's useful to go through some calculation, like CCG does calculate now on the surface trade. It was actually U.S. has drawn a big surplus, so that kind of maybe message should be brought out as well. And also, I think I agree that the sentiment, the confidence is so important to avoid uncertainty. Extremely important. So now we have China, even in the situations like this, we had the Tesla opened a new factory in Shanghai. We had a lot of new still opening measures to other countries, other companies as well. So I think it's in business community's huge interest to have these two largest markets in the world unaffected, so that we can solve this peacefully, so that we can have continue the next 40 years of prosperity and peace and cooperation.
Because Trump has been enjoying popular support because of his economic policies. For example, tax cut, deregulation.
And 4% growth.
But the trade tariffs will probably cancel out all those gains these policies have produced. Steve Mnuchin said that the American economy can enjoy 3% growth for 3 years at least, and those trade policies could derail everything.
I brought you a copy of the report so you can pay attention to the words that are used in the title. China's economic aggression. So some advisors to President Trump use very strong language. Steve Mnuchin apparently is in a different camp, a different point of view. But I think that economic aggression by China appearing in a White House document, this is online, is very important. I've never seen such a deterioration of our relationship in 40 years.
But do you think economic aggression is the correct description of what is happening between China and the U.S. economically?
It's very scary.
Yes, I know it's scary.
Some of these activities
But
I
is
didn't
it
know
correct?
about. Some I didn't know about. There's a chart in here with more than 50 examples of violations of WTO, international norms, violations of China's own rules and statements. So it looks a little bit like Chinese economic aggression is not conducted by President Xi Jinping or the Politburo. Somehow it's happening below that level. And President Trump seems to maintain excellent relations in these phone calls with President Xi.
That's why I said President Trump should listen to moderate voices. It's not the whole picture. China also helped to keep the inflation in America low.
True.
China also invited a lot of companies to make money in China.
Very true.
This is not the whole picture.
Right.
So that's exactly, I think that the communication, the research, and also the analysis of those Chinese, voices be heard also in the U.S. I mean, of course, I think the White House has a report, but I think from China scholar particularly, the think tank should have more analysis and also more accurate reflection and also
Yes, I
discussion with the U.S. counterpart to solve those issues.
I agree.
But
And if our evidence is wrong, Chinese side should point out this case is not accurate, or 没有这么回事, this didn't happen. That would be very constructive.
I think China basically have been reading this document and soul-searching on what might be improved. But the problem is this shouldn't be the whole picture. This has been framed as an economic aggression against the United States. This is not something the Chinese can accept.
You have some Chinese officials who say there's absolutely nothing correct in these White House reports. So this, to me, is very frightening.
You are pointing to only a bunch of people.
I don't want to say their names, but other Chinese officials take this seriously, and they realize if China improves reforms, improves opening up, implements President Xi's promises over the last few years about technology, intellectual property theft, then this can have a good outcome. But you mentioned kind of a debate in the White House. Maybe there is. But it looks like there's also a debate in Beijing.
Of course.
About this evidence.
Let's talk about the debate, because it comes back to what China will do about its own economy. Well, all those things, China has been mentioning its own national strategy, whether we should reform state-owned enterprises, better protect intellectual property rights, what is the role of the governments in the economy. But it seems the world is anxious about the speed of China's reform and the deliverables.
I think China is speeding up. As a matter of fact, I mean, even talk about intellectual property. China has a big interest now. Like ZTE, like Huawei, like Xiaomi, or Lenovo. When they go to foreign countries, they facing the IPR issues also. So service industry now in China's GDP is going to be soon to be 60%, more than manufacturing now. So that means China has to protect its own interest, and then China is also doing the Belt and Road Initiative and also going to different countries. It's important that China catch up on this issue as well. So if we turn this into a positive effect, that I think will strengthen the China's companies' competitiveness and also you increase the dialogue and the communication with American counterpart. I think also American companies will feel much more, it will be much more effective in China, making more money. I think things can, the business community can really make the policy together, and then hopefully we solve this issue. So it's important that those things China is also doing good things as well.
I have another question: is why those complaints about transfer of technology, stealth of copyrights, do not come from businesses? It comes from the government. Why GE, Microsoft, Apple, GM, they don't complain to the Chinese government about those things, or at least they don't apply their complaints in an open and official way?
I've asked that question to our business people. They have a very clear answer.
Yep.
They say if they approach China together, like a 统一战线, united front, through the Chamber of Commerce or through the U.S. government, then the chances to make progress are better. If they go only one company at a time, they're afraid that company will stick out and be punished.
They haven't been doing anything.
That's one of our topics the last 40 years. That's a very good question. We're asking ourselves, Henry and me, why did this intellectual property technology transfer issue not get solved 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And maybe one of the reasons is what you're referring to. The companies were too frightened or too timid to bring the violations forward.
I think the businessmen are the smartest person in the world. If they think they've been bullied, they can leave.
A lot of companies make
they lose market share, then they could be afraid of losing market share to another,
then they are making
company.
Money. Then they are running at a profit.
Another related issue is Belt and Road. Henry mentioned to you Belt and Road. President Trump did not go himself to the Belt and Road Summit last year, 59 heads of state. He only sent NSC staff person Matt Pottinger to be present. Concern about Belt and Road is that some of the misconduct and bad practices in these reports will be fostered and increased by the Belt and Road loan program. So we have some reservations. Doesn't mean someday U.S. might endorse Belt and Road and join it. But first, there's a kind of investigation going on. How is Belt and Road really going to operate in practice? So I think Henry agrees there's at least 20 issues to look at in our joint research project with other think tanks, how to not only avoid a trade war, but have even better U.S.-China coordination and cooperation. Yeah, 可不是吗?
Yeah.
And so you still believe in joining hands between the two largest economies rather than parting ways?
Yes, it's possible.
It's more than possible.
No, absolutely. I think China and U.S. are really so intertwined, interconnected. There's no, I mean, even the number one, number two economy can't get along well. Will be disaster for the world. I think also going to put the world into dangerous position, even recession. So it's absolutely important. I mean, for the moral ground, I mean, U.S. and China has to work together. I think that's also to the benefit of the mankind.
Yes. Okay. But how to get the attention of Xi Jinping himself?
That's a major problem.
To study all this evidence.
And I hope the decision makers have heard what we've been talking about. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Wang. Thank you, Mr. Pillsbury. And you've been watching The Point here on CGTN. I'm Zhou in Beijing. Goodbye.